On March 2nd, 2026, at 7:42 a.m. local time, sirens wailed across Dubai's financial district. Iranian drones had struck the Ras Laffan industrial city in Qatar, home to 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas production. Within hours, Qatar Energy declared force majeure. European gas prices surged 52%. Asian LNG markets jumped 39%. But in the conference rooms of Abu Dhabi and Doha, a different calculation was taking hold. Not about gas prices, about something far more dangerous, because the drones that hit Ras Laffan came in retaliation for the American military bases these countries host. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, 10,000 American troops. Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE. Naval Support Activity Bahrain, headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, 9,000 personnel. All of them, according to Tehran, legitimate military targets. 4 civilians dead, 112 injured. The Burj Al Arab damaged. Dubai International Airport struck. Jebel Ali Port on fire. Not because Qatar, the UAE, or Bahrain attacked Iran, but because they provide the real estate from which others attack Iran. Here's the problem. These countries didn't choose this arrangement out of strength. They chose it out of weakness. Qatar covers 60% of the costs for Al Udeid, roughly $650 million annually. The UAE invested over $100 million in American facilities at Al Dhafra. They built the infrastructure. They pay for the privilege. And now they're absorbing the consequences. This is the story of the Gulf state hostage economy. How Qatar, the UAE, and Bahrain became trapped between American protection and Iranian retaliation. Why the missiles that hit Dubai on March 1st represent not an escalation, but an inevitable outcome of geography, dependency, and the most dangerous bargain in geopolitics. And why the economic collapse these countries now face was always written into the contract they signed when they first invited American forces onto their soil. Let me show you what the geography actually means. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar sits 123 miles from the Iranian coast. Al Dhafra in the UAE, 140 miles. Naval Support Activity Bahrain, 108 miles. These aren't distant forward operating bases. They're neighbors, hostile neighbors. Separated by a distance, an Iranian short-range ballistic missile can cross in under 7 minutes. On February 28, 2026, when American and Israeli forces struck Iranian nuclear facilities, Tehran fired back. Not at Tel Aviv, at Qatar, at the UAE, at Bahrain, at Kuwait, at Saudi Arabia. 165 ballistic missiles hit the UAE alone. 97 targeted Kuwait, 65 struck Qatar. 45 reached Bahrain. Qatari F-15S shot down 2 Iranian Su-24 bombers, attempting to target Al Udeid and Ras Laffan. But impressive doesn't mean invulnerable. 21 drones penetrated UAE air defenses. Parts of the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain were hit. 4 people died. Migrant workers from Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Not military personnel, civilians, killed by debris from a conflict they had no part in starting. Here's what military analysts don't say in briefings. Iran doesn't need to cross the Gulf to destroy these economies. It just needs to make the Strait of Hormuz too dangerous to transit, which it did. By March 3rd, at least 150 vessels had dropped anchor in and around the strait, unwilling to risk passage. Tankers carrying Qatari LNG sat idle. The shutdown wasn't because Ras Laffan was destroyed. It was because the route to market was closed. Qatar's entire economic model depends on LNG exports moving safely through a waterway. Iran can shut down with mines, anti-ship missiles, and swarm boat attacks. The UAE's Jebel Ali port, the largest in the Middle East, relies on the same passage. They are, all of them, economically hostage to a neighbor who views American bases on their territory as an existential threat. Geography didn't change, but the price of that geography just became impossible to pay. Here's the part that doesn't make headlines. These countries don't host American bases because they love America. They host American bases because they fear everyone else. Bahrain is majority Shia, roughly 65%. The ruling Al Khalifa family is Sunni. During the 2011 Arab Spring, when protesters demanded political reform, Saudi Arabia sent troops across the King Fahd Causeway to restore order. 1,500 soldiers. Tanks rolling into Manama. The American presence provides a counterweight to complete Saudi dominance. The U.S. Fifth Fleet employs 9,000 personnel in a country with a population of 1.5 million. The base isn't just military infrastructure, it's a political anchor. except the anchor just became a target, and the protection it was supposed to provide now requires Bahrain to absorb Iranian missile strikes aimed at American assets it hosts but doesn't control. Qatar's dependency is different but equally profound. In 2017, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt imposed a blockade on Qatar. Closed borders, severed ties. The blockade lasted 3 years. During that period, Qatar's survival depended on Turkish support and American protection. Qatar spent $1 billion building Al Udeid in the 1990s, then another $1.8 billion in expansions. Not because Qatar needs a base that large, because America does. And as long as America needs Al Udeid, Qatar has protection against its neighbors. Except now that protection has a different price. On June 23, 2025, Iran fired missiles at Al Udeid during the 12-day war, giving advance warning. On February 28, 2026, the missiles came again, no warning this time. On March 3rd, an Iranian missile struck Al Udeid. The pattern is clear. As long as Al Udeid exists, Qatar will be a target. And Qatar can't afford to lose Al Udeid, because losing Al Udeid means losing the American security umbrella that protects it from Saudi Arabia. The dependency loop is complete. Qatar hosts American forces to protect against regional rivals. American forces make Qatar a target for Iran. Iranian attacks force Qatar deeper into American dependence. The cycle escalates. The UAE calculated that American protection would deter Iranian aggression. Instead, it discovered that American presence invites Iranian targeting. By March 2nd, the UAE had intercepted 165 ballistic missiles, 541 drones, and 2 cruise missiles. The defense was effective, but defense doesn't prevent economic paralysis. Airlines suspended flights. Airspace became a no-fly zone. The sheen of invincibility that made Dubai a global hub cracked. Meanwhile, the protection itself remains conditional. The U.S. State Department condemned Iranian attacks. Strong language, firm commitment. But notice what the statement didn't say. It didn't promise American retaliation for strikes on Gulf soil. It didn't guarantee that American forces would defend these countries' civilian infrastructure. American forces at Al Udeid are there to protect American interests. If Qatar's interests align, that's fortunate. If they don't, well, Qatar signed a basing agreement, not a mutual defense treaty. The dependency was always asymmetrical. The Gulf states provide real estate, funding, political cover. The U.S. provides presence, not promises. And when the missiles start flying, presence isn't protection. It's a provocation. Qatar Energy's announcement on March 2nd sent shockwaves through global energy markets. All natural gas production halted. All LNG liquefaction stopped. Force majeure declared on contracts with buyers across Asia and Europe. The reason wasn't catastrophic damage. The reason was the Strait of Hormuz. Shipping had stopped. And without the ability to export, there's no point in producing. Qatar supplies 20% of global LNG. That 20% is now offline. India imports 41% of its LNG from Qatar. Europe depends on Qatari supplies to replace lost Russian gas. Asian buyers have long-term contracts anchored to Qatari volumes. All of them, as of March 4th, received force majeure notices. No gas. No timeline for resumption. And this is before we discuss the long-term implications. Because the force majeure notices aren't just about lost revenue this month. They're about lost credibility for years. Qatar positioned itself as a reliable LNG supplier. Long-term contracts, decades-long commitments. Those commitments just failed. Not because Qatar didn't want to deliver, because geography made delivery impossible. Because hosting American bases made Qatar a target. Because Iranian retaliation made the strait impassable. Buyers will remember. When the next long-term contract comes up for negotiation, the answer will factor in geopolitical risk. Qatar's premium, the trust that came from decades of reliability, just evaporated. The UAE's brand, the glittering image of a safe, stable emirate insulated from regional chaos, just took a hit. Palm Jumeirah evacuations don't pair well with marketing Dubai as a haven for global capital. Lost LNG revenue for Qatar, conservatively estimated at $3 billion per month if the shutdown persists. Lost trade and tourism revenue for the UAE, hundreds of millions weekly. Lost investment flows as capital markets reassess risk premiums. Lost future contracts as buyers diversify away from single chokepoint suppliers. But here's the real cost. The recognition that their economies are structurally vulnerable, that their wealth depends on export routes Iran can close, that their infrastructure is within missile range, that the American security guarantee they paid for doesn't prevent economic paralysis. It guarantees it. By March 6th, Qatar's energy minister Saad Sharida al-Kabi issued a warning that made the stakes explicit. If the war continues, he said, other Gulf producers may be forced to halt exports and declare force majeure. That will bring down economies of the world. Oil prices surged on the statement. The Gulf produces 30% of the world's oil and 20% of its natural gas. If Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait follow Qatar's path, if the Strait of Hormuz becomes a contested war zone that insurance companies won't cover, global energy markets don't just tighten, they seize. But here's the convergence point. Gulf states can't stop hosting American bases without losing American protection. They can't keep hosting American bases without absorbing Iranian retaliation. They can't export energy while absorbing Iranian retaliation because the export routes become impassable. And they can't function economically without exporting energy. The choice is binary and both options fail. Evict American forces and face regional rivals, internal instability, Iranian pressure without counterweight. Keep American forces and face continued Iranian strikes, economic paralysis, infrastructure damage. UAE tried to split the difference. Before the strikes began, the UAE announced it would not allow its territory to be used for hostile military actions against Iran. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman made similar statements. The hope was clear. If we don't participate, maybe Iran won't strike us. The calculation failed. Iran struck them because they host the infrastructure that enables American participation. Hosting is participation. There's no good option. Only trade-offs between different types of vulnerability, between American protection that provokes Iranian retaliation and Iranian accommodation that invites regional predation, between economic collapse from conflict and economic dependency on a hostile neighbor. If the Strait of Hormuz remains contested for 6 months, if Qatari LNG stays offline, if Gulf oil exports face persistent disruption, global oil prices hit $150 per barrel. Gas prices double again. Inflation surges. Recession spread. The 2026 crisis becomes the 2027 depression. And the Gulf states, for all their sovereign wealth funds and gleaming towers, discover that their prosperity was always conditional, dependent on a geographic choke point staying open, on American bases providing deterrence without provoking retaliation, on assumptions that no longer hold. This is the world being built right now, not in dramatic fashion, but through force majeure notices, through suspended flight routes, through workers boarding planes home, through canceled investment conferences, through insurance companies recalculating risk premiums for Gulf assets. The Gulf states spent decades constructing an image of invincibility, skyscrapers reaching higher than anywhere else, airports larger, ports busier, sovereign wealth funds richer. The message was clear. We've transcended regional chaos. We're global hubs, safe, stable, profitable. The missiles falling on Dubai and Doha and Manama in March 2026 didn't just damage buildings, they destroyed the narrative. Geography can't be transcended with architecture. Regional chaos can't be escaped with free zones. And hosting American military bases designed to contain your neighbor doesn't insulate you from your neighbor's retaliation. It guarantees it. The infrastructure that powered Gulf prosperity, the LNG trains at Ras Laffan, the container terminals at Jebel Ali, the financial towers in Dubai, all of it sits within range of missiles and drones that cost a fraction of the targets they threaten. Iran spent maybe a few $100 million on the projectiles launched in the first week of March 2026. The damage to Gulf infrastructure, the lost economic output, the disrupted contracts, the fled capital, it runs into the tens of billions. And the paralysis won't end when the current war ends, because buyers remember. March 2026 becomes the reference point, the moment when geographic vulnerability and American base hosting and Iranian retaliation converged to prove that Gulf stability was always conditional, always dependent on circumstances the Gulf states don't control. The hostage economy isn't a metaphor, it's a description. These countries are hostages to geography that places them in missile range of Iran, hostages to energy dependence that requires export routes Iran can close, hostages to American protection that provokes the retaliation they need protection from. The Gulf state hostage economy isn't coming. It's here. Most people just haven't noticed yet. If you're watching this, you understand something most don't. The Gulf crisis isn't a regional conflict that stays regional. It's a chokepoint crisis that goes global. When 20% of the world's LNG and 30% of its oil flow through a waterway that hostile powers can contest, when the economic model that powered globalization depends on those flows continuing, The collapse isn't theoretical. It's already underway. Subscribe to stay ahead of the stories that actually matter, because the next episode reveals something even more unsettling. Next time, the dollar weapon system. How the U.S. controls global finance not through interest rates but through sanctions. Why every international transaction depends on American permission. And the backlash that's fracturing the system right now. Because the power to exclude is becoming the power to provoke alternatives. The silent war continues. The question is whether you're watching or just waiting for the gas prices to reach you.